What happens when a seasoned journalist decides he's had enough of royal deflection and diplomatic answers? What happens when Prince Harry walks into what he thinks will be another softball interview, only to find himself face to face with a host who's done playing games? You're about to witness one of the most intense confrontations ever captured on live television, where pleasantries quickly turn into a verbal battlefield and where every question becomes a loaded weapon aimed directly at the heart of royal controversy. This isn't your typical royal interview where everyone dances around the real issues. This is raw, unfiltered, and absolutely explosive. George Stephanopoulos strips away all pretense and goes straight for the jugular, while Prince Harry finds himself completely unprepared for the onslaught that's about to come his way. The tension in that studio was so thick you could cut it with a knife. And what you're about to see will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about both of these public figures. Before we dive into this incredible confrontation, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to want to miss a single moment of what's coming next. Trust me, this gets intense fast. The interview started innocently enough. George Stephanopoulos sat across from Prince Harry in the pristine studio, the cameras rolling, the lights perfectly positioned. But there was something different in Steph's demeanor today. Something that suggested this wouldn't be the gentle questioning Harry had grown accustomed to during his media tour. "Your Royal Highness, thank you for joining us," Stephanopoulos began, his voice carrying an edge that wasn't there. "During the pre-and pleasantries, I want to start with something that's been bothering me, and I think it's been bothering a lot of people watching your recent interviews." Harry shifted slightly in his chair, his practiced smile faltering just a fraction. "Of course, George. I'm here to be as open and honest as possible." "Are you, though?" Stephanopoulos leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Harry's with laser focus, "because I've watched you do interview after interview, and frankly, I'm starting to see a pattern of selective truth-telling that I find deeply concerning." The words hit Harry like a physical blow. This wasn't the respectful difference he'd expected. This wasn't the careful diplomatic questioning he'd prepared for. The prince's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but Stephanopoulos caught it. "Sorry, but I don't think that's fair," Harry replied, his voice carrying the first hint of defensiveness. "I've been more transparent about my life and my family than any member of the royal family in history." "Have you, though?" Stephanopoulos pressed, not giving him even a moment to recover. "Or have you been selectively sharing only the parts of the story that paint you in the most favorable light, while conveniently omitting the details that might complicate that narrative?" The studio fell silent except for the barely audible hum of the cameras. Harry's media training kicked in, and he attempted to regain control of the conversation. "George, I think you're mischaracterizing what I've shared. Everything I've said has been my truth, my experience growing up in that institution." "Your truth?" Stephanopoulos repeated, his tone dripping with skepticism. "That's an interesting phrase, Your Royal Highness, because truth, real truth, isn't subjective. It's not something that changes depending on who's telling the story or what agenda they're trying to push." Harry's composure was beginning to crack. The careful mask of media-trained politeness was slipping, revealing something raw underneath. "I don't have an agenda, George. I'm simply trying to heal, to move forward with my life, and to protect my family from the same toxic system that destroyed my mother." "And there it is," Stephanopoulos said, leaning back in his chair with a knowing look. "The victim narrative. The same story you've been selling for years now. But here's what I don't understand, and what I think a lot of people don't understand. If the institution was so terrible, if it was so damaging, why did you wait until you were financially cut off to suddenly develop this conscience about how awful it all was?" The question landed like a bomb in the middle of the studio. Harry's face flushed red, and for the first time in the interview, his careful composure completely shattered. That's not what happened at all," Harry stammered, his voice rising slightly. "You're twisting the timeline. You're misrepresenting the facts." "Am I?" Stephanopoulos challenged, his voice steady and calm in contrast to Harry's growing agitation. "Because from where I sit, it looks like you were perfectly happy to be part of that institution when it was funding your lifestyle, when it was giving you status and privilege. It was only when that support was withdrawn that you suddenly discovered your moral objections." "You don't know what you're talking about," Harry shot back, his royal training completely abandoned now. "You have no idea what it was like living in that system. What it did to my family. What it did to my wife." "Then enlighten me," Stephanopoulos said, his voice taking on an almost predatory quality. "Tell me about the racist comments. Tell me exactly who said what, when they said it, And in what context? Because right now, you've made these explosive allegations that have damaged your family's reputation internationally. But you've been remarkably vague about the specifics. Harry opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, clearly struggling with how much he wanted to reveal. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity, and Stephanopoulos just waited, letting the uncomfortable quiet do the work for him. "It's not that simple," Harry finally said, his voice quieter now, but still carrying an undercurrent of anger. "These are private family conversations, but you've already made them public," Stephanopoulos countered immediately. "You can't have it both ways, Your Royal Highness. You can't drop these bombshells and then retreat behind privacy when people ask for details. Either these conversations happened as you've described them, or they didn't. Either there's evidence to support your claims, or there isn't." The trap was perfectly laid, and Harry had walked right into it. His face was a mixture of frustration, anger, and something that looked almost like panic as he realized the corner he'd been backed into. Harry's hands were visibly trembling now as he gripped the arms of his chair. The polished royal facade had completely crumbled, revealing something desperate and cornered underneath. He looked like a man who had just realized he'd brought a knife to a gunfight. "You're trying to trap me," Harry said, his voice barely controlled. "This isn't journalism. This is an ambush." Stephanopoulos didn't even blink. "No, Your Royal Highness. This is accountability, something you've managed to avoid in every other interview you've done. But I'm not Oprah, and I'm not going to sit here and nod sympathetically while you rewrite history to suit your narrative." "I'm not rewriting anything," Harry snapped, his composure completely gone now. "I'm telling the truth about what happened to my family." "Then prove it," Stephanopoulos said, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Give me names, give me dates, give me something concrete that can be verified. Instead of these vague allegations that conveniently can't be fact-checked because they happened in private, Harry's face went through a series of emotions from anger to confusion to something that looked almost like fear. He was clearly not prepared for this level of scrutiny. This refusal to accept his word at face value. "I don't have to prove anything to you," Harry said finally. But his voice lacked conviction. "My experiences speak for themselves." "Do they, though?" Stephanopoulos leaned forward again, sensing blood in the water. "Because here's what I see when I look at your experiences. I see a man who had every privilege, every advantage, every opportunity handed to him on a silver platter. And when that platter was taken away, when he was asked to actually contribute something meaningful to the institution that had given him everything, he ran." The words hit Harry like physical blows. His face was flushed red now, and there was a wildness in his eyes that suggested he was close to completely losing control. "That's not what happened," Harry said, his voice rising to almost a shout. "You're completely mischaracterizing everything. We didn't run. We were pushed out. We were abandoned by the very institution that was supposed to protect us, were you?" Though Stephanopoulos pressed relentless in his pursuit. "Or did you make demands that were unreasonable, unrealistic, and ultimately incompatible with the role you were born to serve? Did you expect to have all the benefits of royal life without any of the responsibilities?" Harry was on his feet now, his chair pushed back, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. The cameras captured every moment of his breakdown, every crack in the carefully constructed public persona. "You don't understand," Harry said, his voice breaking slightly. "You weren't there. You didn't see what they did to Meghan, how they treated her, how they systematically destroyed her mental health." "Then tell me specifically what they did," Stephanopoulos said, his voice maddeningly calm in contrast to Harry's obvious distress. "Stop speaking in generalities and give me concrete examples of this systematic destruction you're talking about." Harry opened his mouth, then closed it again, clearly struggling. The silence stretched on, and it was obvious to everyone watching that he didn't have an answer. At least not one he was willing to give. "It's not that simple," Harry repeated, the fight beginning to drain out of him. "These are complex family dynamics that played out over years. But you've already simplified them," Stephanopoulos pointed out mercilessly. "You've reduced years of complex family dynamics to a simple story of good versus evil with you and your wife as the innocent victims and everyone else as the villains. That's not complexity. That's a fairy tale." Harry slumped back into his chair, looking suddenly older, more fragile. The anger was still there, but it was mixed now with something that looked almost like defeat. "You're twisting everything I'm saying," Harry said weakly. "You're making it sound like I'm lying, like none of what we went through was real." "I'm not making it sound like anything," Stephanopoulos replied. I'm simply asking you to back up your claims with facts instead of feelings. And so far, you haven't been able to do that. The studio was dead silent, except for the sound of Harry's labored breathing. He looked like a man who had just realized he was completely out of his depth. That all his media training and all his prepared talking points were useless against this level of relentless questioning. "This interview is over," Harry said suddenly, starting to remove his microphone. "I don't have to sit here and be attacked like this." "Attacked?" Stephanopoulos' eyebrows shot up. "Your Royal Highness, I haven't attacked you once. I've simply asked you to provide evidence for the serious allegations you've made against your family and the institution. If you consider that an attack, what does that say about the strength of your position?" Harry froze, his hand halfway to his microphone. The words had stopped him cold, and it was clear he was wrestling with whether to stay and continue the interview or walk out and face the inevitable criticism that would follow. "You're putting words in my mouth," Harry said. But there was no conviction left in his voice. "You're making me sound like I'm some kind of liar or manipulator." "I'm not making you sound like anything," Stephanopoulos said quietly. "I'm letting your own words speak for themselves. And right now, those words are telling a very different story than the one you've been trying to sell." Harry sat back down slowly, his shoulders sagging with defeat. It was clear he knew he couldn't walk out now. Not without proving stuff point about his inability to handle tough questions. "What do you want from me?" Harry asked. And for the first time in the interview, he sounded genuinely vulnerable rather than defensive. "I want the truth," Stephanopoulos said simply. "Not your truth, not your version of events, but the actual verifiable truth about what happened and why you made the choices you made." Harry was quiet for a long moment, staring down at his hands. When he looked up again, there was something different in his eyes. Something that suggested the fight had finally gone out of him completely. "Maybe the truth is more complicated." "Then I've made it sound," Harry said quietly, and it was the first genuinely honest thing he'd said all interview. Stephanopoulos leaned back slightly, sensing that they might finally be getting somewhere real. Stephanopoulos studied Harry's face carefully, recognizing the shift in his demeanor. This was the moment he'd been building toward the crack in the armor that would either lead to genuine revelation or complete collapse. "Complicated how?" Stefan asked, his voice softer now but still probing. "What complications have you been leaving out of?" "Your public narrative." Harry ran his hands through his hair, a gesture that made him look younger, more vulnerable. The polished prince was gone, replaced by someone who seemed genuinely tormented. "Maybe I wanted them to be the villains," Harry said slowly, the words seeming to surprise even him as they came out. "Maybe it was easier to blame them for everything than to admit that I played a role in how things fell apart." It was a stunning admission, and Stephanopoulos knew better than to interrupt the moment. With another question, he simply waited, letting the silence do its work. "But that doesn't mean they're innocent," Harry continued, his voice gaining strength again. "What they did to Meghan, what they allowed to happen, that was real. The racism, the isolation, the refusal to protect her, all of that happened. I'm not disputing that something happened," Stephanopoulos said carefully. "But what I am questioning is your portrayal of yourself as a passive victim in all of this. You're a grown man, a military veteran, someone with agency and power. What did you do to try to fix these problems before you decided to leave?" Harry's face darkened again, and for a moment it seemed like he might retreat back into his defensive posture. But something had shifted in him, and instead of deflecting, he actually seemed to be considering the question. "I tried to talk to them," Harry said finally. "I tried to explain what was happening, how the media coverage was affecting Meghan's mental health, how the lack of support from the institution was making everything worse." "And what did they say when you talked to them?" Stephanopoulos pressed. "They said it was part of the job," Harry replied, his voice bitter. "They said everyone goes through it, that I needed to keep quiet and let it pass. But it wasn't passing, George. It was getting worse every day." "So you left," Stephanopoulos said. "You took your wife and your child and you left. And in doing so, you proved their point that you couldn't handle the pressure that comes with being a working royal." The words hit Harry like a slap across the face. His entire body tensed, and for a moment it looked like he might explode again, but instead something unexpected happened. He laughed, but it was a hollow, bitter sound. "You're right," Harry said, and the admission seemed to drain the last of his fight. "I couldn't handle it. I couldn't handle watching my wife suffer the way my mother suffered. I couldn't handle being complicit in a system that I knew was destroying the people I loved most. But instead of trying to change that system from within, You chose to burn it down from the outside, Stephanopoulos observed. You chose to air your family's private business in the most public way possible. Why? Harry was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because I was angry, he said. Because I felt betrayed and abandoned, and I wanted them to hurt the way they'd hurt me. I wanted the world to see them the way I saw them. It was the most honest thing he'd said all interview, and the raw pain in his voice was impossible to fake. Even Stephanopoulos seemed momentarily taken back by the naked vulnerability of the admission. And now, Stephanopoulos asked quietly, now that you've had time to reflect, do you think that was the right approach? Harry looked directly into the camera for the first time since the interview began, and there was something haunting in his eyes. I don't know, he said, and the 3 words carried the weight of years of regret and uncertainty. I honestly don't know anymore. Maybe I hurt my family more than they ever hurt me. Maybe I became the villain in my own story. But you still believe your grievances were legitimate, Stephanopoulos pressed, not willing to let him off the hook completely. Yes, Harry said, his voice stronger again. What happened to Meghan was real. The racism was real. The institutional failures were real. But maybe my response to those real problems made everything worse instead of better. Stephanopoulos leaned back in his chair, studying Harry's face. This was the moment that would define the entire interview, the moment where he would either push for complete capitulation or allow for some measure of dignity in defeat. Your Royal Highness, Stephanopoulos said finally, I want to thank you for that level of honesty. It's refreshing to hear someone in your position acknowledge that the situation might be more nuanced than you've previously suggested. Harry nodded slowly, looking emotionally exhausted. I'm still learning, George. I'm still trying to figure out how to balance protecting my family with being fair to the family I left behind. And what about your relationship with your father and your brother? Stephanopoulos asked. Is there any path forward for reconciliation? Harry was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, there was genuine pain in his voice. I hope so, he said. I love them both despite everything, but I don't know if the damage can be undone. I don't know if they can forgive me for what I've said, what I've done. And can you forgive them? Stephanopoulos asked. I'm trying to, Harry replied. Every day I'm trying to, but forgiveness is harder than anger, George. Anger is simple, clean. Forgiveness requires you to acknowledge your own role in the mess, and that's something I'm still learning how to do. It was a profound moment of self-reflection, and even Stephanopoulos seemed moved by the genuine emotion in Harry's voice. Your Royal Highness, thank you for your honesty today, Stephanopoulos said. I know this wasn't easy, Harry nodded, looking like a man who had just been through an emotional war. Thank you for holding me accountable, George. I needed that, even if I didn't want it. As the camera stopped rolling, the studio remained silent for a moment. What had just transpired wasn't just an interview. It was a reckoning. A public figure had been stripped of his carefully constructed narrative and forced to confront the uncomfortable truths about his own role in his family's drama. And there you have it, the most explosive royal interview in recent memory. George Stephanopoulos didn't just interview Prince Harry. He systematically dismantled the carefully constructed victim narrative that had defined Harry's public persona for years. What we witnessed was raw, unfiltered, and absolutely devastating. The question now is whether this moment of forced honesty will lead to genuine reconciliation, or if it's simply too late for the bridges that have been burned. What do you think? Was Stephanopoulos too harsh, or was this exactly the kind of accountability that Prince Harry needed to face? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure you subscribe for more content that goes beyond the surface of these major stories, because this is what real journalism looks like when someone finally decides to ask the hard questions that everyone else has been afraid to mask.